All right.
Give it a minute here for it to go live here. I'll let you know when it's ready.
Okay. And then everyone, if you can make sure if you're not speaking that you're muted, you do not have to worry about what you look like on the screen per se, because Carol will only spotlight the person who's speaking.
All right, it's good to go.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We're very excited to have you here today with us. We'd like to welcome you to the 2020 Native American Heritage Month kickoff celebration. My name is Lindy Wagner, and I'm the director of the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. And we're really excited to be bringing another Heritage Month to you via the SIU System YouTube, because we are in collaboration with Southern Illinois University Carbondale as a part of the SIU System. We're really looking forward to bringing you a really wonderful amount of events to celebrate the contributions made by Indigenous people within our community and across the nation. But today, we're going to start our kickoff and our celebration with a really wonderful welcome from our system president, who I really enjoy introducing each and every time for our kickoffs. I'm going to pass it directly to you, Dr. Dan Mahoney, SIU system president.
Well, thank you, Lindy, and thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank all the people who are here, particularly those who will be our key speakers tonight. This is a big celebration. Native American Heritage Month is an opportunity to celebrate and recognize the accomplishments of people who were the original inhabitants and explorers and settlers of the United States. It's also time to remember and celebrate Native American indigenous culture while not culture freezing and recognizing that the entire population is not frozen in time. I'm a history guy. My dad was a history teacher, and it's important to understand the history of people, but it's also important to celebrate that indigenous and native people contribute to our society each and every day and can continue to make massive contributions. There are about close to 2 million people who are recognized as Native Americans or Alaska Natives in the United States, and actually over 570 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And so it's also important time to recognize that there's diversity within the Native American culture. Sometimes we put people into one big group and don't recognize the fact that there's different cultures and different traditions within each of those groups. And it's an opportunity to learn more about those traditions and those cultures. So I want to again congratulate everybody for putting together a number of activities over the next month to celebrate Native American Heritage Month. I hope you'll take advantage of not just tonight's event, but the many events that are coming up. I also be remiss if I didn't say we're going through a strategic planning process as a system right now. And while I don't want to say for sure what our goals will be, don't want to get ahead of the committee, I think it's pretty clear to say that it will focus on anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion will certainly be a goal. And while our focus this summer clearly has been on African Americans, when we talk about anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not restricted just to African Americans. We have a very broad definition of what diversity means, and that certainly applies to the Native American culture as well, and the Native American students, faculty, and staff. We want everybody to have a sense that they belong here at SIU. And if we're not doing all that we can, we ask that you tell us what we can do better and give us the advice that we need to be even a better university system. So again, thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to tonight's event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahoney. We really appreciate those remarks. And with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Sarah Marbs.
Hi all, I am Sarah Marbs. I work in Carbondale coordinating the Center for Service Learning and Volunteerism, as well as the Women's Resource Center. It will be my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Chancellor at SIU Carbondale, Dr. Austin Lane. Dr. Lane was appointed Chancellor in May of this year, and he brings more than 20 years of leadership experience and, most importantly, a commitment to supporting and meeting the needs of our students. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lane for reflective remarks.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for all the work that you do. And it's good to see Lindy. Thank you. I know you've been all over the place. I don't know how you keep pace with everything. And thanks to the committee for allowing me and others the opportunity to help kick off the month. And so I think this is very important. You know, many things in history should be remembered across the country as it relates to Native people. From the arrival of the first people through the emergence of distinct tribal nations who faced the upheaval of European settlement and into the modern day, the continued battles over sacred land, all aspects are definitely heavy and complex. It's also important to remember that Native people's culture is in historic sites. One of my home states and going to school in the University of Oklahoma, in Colorado, in New Mexico. There are impressive architectural and agricultural achievements. If you've been to many of those places that I just mentioned, the villages, field houses, the reservoirs, the great the cliff dwellings, the shrines, the sacred springs, the list goes on and on and on. There's so much to appreciate and so much to learn and to value and to protect. I think this is also key. Additionally, the things that we enjoy, at least I have enjoyed, probably too much, the many foods that we eat, the medicines and remedies that we use were introduced by Native people. I think it's important to remember that, acknowledge that. Indigenous people contribute to all areas of everyday life, including the arts and literature, as well as having a long history of serving in the armed forces. And that is extremely important, and we thank them for that. While we celebrate the many achievements and contributions of Native people this month, it's also important to reflect on the terrible stories of violence and injustice that are all too often a part of this nation's history. And you heard our president talk about the diversity, equity, and inclusion from a system perspective and how that is moving very, very fluidly into our universities inside the system, which I'm very excited about. So remember to stay in the moment of those reflections and consider as you attend the events and the celebrations. That's great, but I always say this, 1 month is never enough. This is what I call life's work, things that we have to do every single day to make sure that we make sure we rid out any oppression or obstacles that paint perceptions of things that are going to be harmful to the populations that we're talking about, particularly Native American populations. And so with that, I'm just excited really to be a part of these discussions. We've had many, and so I'm so glad that the committee has taken on in doing this. Again, to the folks on both of our campuses, Sarah, Lindy, and all of the committee members, just thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be educated even more, not only this month, but beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Lane. We'll turn it back over to Lindy.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Sorry, I had a moment there with my Zoom. So thank you again, Chancellor Lane, for sharing those welcoming remarks. And also again, Dr. Mahoney, we appreciate you very much. I'm really thrilled to announce our next speaker, who is our keynote for this evening. It's Marcia Forrest, who will serve as our keynote and is a woman of Mohawk ancestry, Six Nations Reservation from Ontario, Canada. She's worked as a registered nurse for 40 years. Although she's now retired, she still enjoys helping others discover their own strengths and responsibility for their holistic well-being. Over the last 35 years, she has been grateful to learn about the traditional teachings and ceremonies of healing from many Native elders of various lineages. Organizations that Marcia has represented include the Aboriginal Nurses Association of Canada, Canadian Women's Health Network, Earth Peoples United, and Grandmothers Circle the Earth, and many more. So with that, I'm super excited to welcome you, Marcia, and the floor is now yours. Welcome.
Okay, thank you so much, Lindy, and I'm glad to be here. I've been attending the Native American Heritage Month events at SIU Carbondale since about 2007. So I was always intrigued and always interested in the variety of information that was offered to us. And I guess I did my first presentation as a co-presenter in about 2010 and was able to serve on the planning committee at SIUC for the last few years. And I just wanted to say that what I really appreciate about this month again is about celebrating that diversity so that we can continue to learn and understand and appreciate one another as people sharing space on this planet, and that we can appreciate and celebrate one another as people with more similarities than differences, so that we can build a greater connection of unity with one another. So how I'd like to start this today is how with the Haudenosaunee, we start all of our gatherings and business. And that is, we speak the words that come before all else. And what it does is it helps to bring everybody who is present into that framework of being totally present. And it's another name for it is called the Thanksgiving Address. And what it does is it really helps us to bring into focus all those things that we really need to acknowledge and be thankful for really every single day. And we know that Thanksgiving is just around the corner. So even more this time of year when Thanksgiving is going to be a little bit different, I think, for everybody this year. So I will begin this by saying the greetings and thanks to the natural world. So first, I'd like to express greetings and thanks to the people of the world from all races and wherever they may live, that the unity and ongoing of the people will continue for time to come. So I give greetings and thanks to that. And then I also give greetings and thanks to the Mother Earth, the earth who provides to us and supports us in every way and has ever since we have been present on this planet. I'd like to give greetings and thanks to the waters of the planet, the waters that we know in many forms that comes as rain, that's the rivers, the streams, it's mist, and even the waters within our own bodies. I give greetings and thanks to those. I give greetings and thanks to the fish and all the swimmers that live in the waters for their job of helping to purify the waters so that we can continue to use them in a good way. And I also give greetings and thanks to the plants that are all over this planet and that continue to flourish. I especially give thanks for the food plants that have provided us with the nourishment and sustenance to continue to survive and to live. And I especially give thanks for the medicine plants that are there to always to help us to be well. I give thanks for the animals, the four-leggeds that we share this planet with, for they also provide us with some of our food, and that we give thanks that they are there and that we can enjoy their presence and share the space with them. We give thanks for the trees, for the important work that they do in helping to purify the air so that we can breathe, and that they are there to provide us also with certain kinds of food and resources for building homes and all kinds of other things that we use every day. I give thanks for the birds, the winged ones that fly in the air, and for their beauty, their beautiful feathers and colors and the songs that they sing so we can learn to enjoy and appreciate every single day. I give thanks for the four winds that come from the four directions and that also bring the change of seasons, for they have messages to tell us. And if we will but listen, we will learn from them as well. I give thanks to the thunderers, those thunder beings that come from the west and announce the arrival of the rain. We give thanks for them, for keeping us alert and aware of what is coming. We give thanks for the sun, father's son, who comes up each and every single day and travels east to west, bringing us that daylight. I give thanks for the grandmother moon, who shines her light at nighttime and helps us to find our way at night, and also has a great impact over the waters of this world. I give thanks for the stars that also shine in that nighttime sky and help to guide us on our way. I give thanks for the enlightened teachers who continue to come, especially when we need them and may have forgotten some of the lessons and basic teachings of living peacefully in this world. And I give thanks to the Creator, the one who created us. And I give thanks that we will continue to live in harmony with all of creation. And in these closing words, I give thanks to anything I may have forgotten to mention, because it was not my intention to do so. And so I give greetings and thanks to all of these things, Yahweh. So that for us is a Thanksgiving prayer that really keeps us connected to all that is important to us in our lives on a day-to-day basis. And so whenever they start events, that is what they open it with, so that it kind of like brings everybody who's present and brings their minds in that place of being present and in oneness as they proceed with the business of the day. So some of the things that I was asked to mention today was talking about some of the contributions that have been made by Indigenous people, past and present. And a lot of the things that may have been noticed, I guess, by the initial settlers, really, you know, a lot of them, they are really current today too. And one of the main things I would say would be the value system that we were instructed with. And that was having a great respect for Mother Earth. So this was ecology 101 way back then. And so even though it wasn't called that, but that was respecting the land, because every land space that we visit has a story. There were people who either lived there permanently or wandered through there on their migration cycles and used that land for food gathering or just traveling, because there were many ancient trade routes where the different tribes would visit each other and exchange goods. And there was also the respect for every form of life, because the belief is that it is a relative and it also has a spirit. And they only gathered the food that was necessary and that was needed for survival and for them to eat, but they were also able to share it with others in the community, especially those who could not provide so well for themselves. And they only hunted and killed what was needed. It was not a sport. And they assumed that you learn to live in harmony with nature. And that was really based on what they needed for survival. There was also respect for fellow man. And there was a generosity and sharing, even to the original European settlers who came, because their survival depended on it. So they shared their food, they shared their farming practices so that the new settlers could be successful in growing their own food. And pre-colonization, they had prosperous societies that were for the benefit of the community. So everybody pretty much took care of each other. There was a respect for the aged. There was family traditions that got carried on, and there was a place for everyone, because remember, there was a time when there were no hospitals back then. There were no prisons and asylums, but somehow that community took care of their business and were able to live in that way. And even for those who were unwell, whether it was in body, mind, or spirit, they had a respect for the Great Spirit and all of creation. And they also had a great respect for honest leadership selection. And for instance, where I lived in Six Nations, it's the clan mothers who chose the chiefs of the clans, and they would begin to spot, you know, those who were promising when they were young boys, and they would train them. And so once this person was put into the role of chieftainship, if for some reason they didn't fulfill their role of doing for the good of their overall community, the clan mothers could just easily remove them and then put someone else in who could do that job in a better way. So that was, and also the US governmental system itself, Benjamin Franklin, he noticed how the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, that was a group of Six Nations who came together, he liked the way that they had central powers with the main council, but that each separate tribe actually could govern themselves, much like the state system is here. So some of the US system was based on those guidelines. They were also the initial guides and trackers wherever those native villages were set up. They were initially in really good locations because they were either near streams or transportation networks or places where they could travel from easily. And the food and trade also took place there. And then these sites ended up becoming the trading posts, which then became towns and then became cities. There's a lot of food that we eat today. They say about 60% of the current everyday food comes from what was initially here when the settlers came. So those were things like potatoes, tomatoes, and corn, of course. And then there's the beans and squash, the corn, bean, squash, part of the Three Sisters, pumpkins, jerky. They used to make jerky out of a lot of their fish and meat because that was a way they could store it during the winter. And they even had barbecue because they used to cook on the outdoor fires. They had nuts. The sunflowers came from here, cranberries, wild rice, maple syrup, and even gum. Gum came from spruce trees, and later on they added sugar to it. And now that's something that a lot of people enjoy as a treat. And also chocolate, where the cacao grows, and then vanilla. And they learned how to work with the natural plant medicines too for different illnesses that they came across. Even when they had dysentery, upset stomachs, there was always teas or plants or roots that they could make. They could make poultices from different plants to help with infections. They even had their own cough syrup. They had medicines for headaches and pain relievers. There's a type of, I guess, a compound of aspirin that's actually found in the willow tree. And of course, they had what helped to deal with the scurvy that a lot of the settlers had on the ships. They made that out of a combination of bark and pine needles. And they actually had dental care back then. They used stick sites to clean their teeth, which was something I guess the settlers picked up on too and started doing the same thing. They also have, to this day, they had art back then, but the art was more used every day, but over time it became more of the designs and styles that continue to influence modern day designs and architecture. They have their own music, different kinds of entertainment. They've had actors, professional athletes. And one of the creations they had too is, I guess that in the North, they were the ones who initially invented snow goggles because of the possible snow blindness. And they actually took a piece of bone and carved a hole in there so that they could actually then tie those to their head, and it would decrease the amount of glare that they would have to be looking at. They also had a lot of games such as lacrosse, snowshoes that came from the North. They had canoes and kayaks and toboggans because they had to create something that was going to help them to bring that wild game back to the villages after they caught it. And in the wintertime, especially, it slid really well on snow. They had different ball games. They had dart games and tug of war games. And a lot of the words used today too come from native words of different tribal languages. A lot of the names of places like mountains and rivers are named after, it has a native word. For instance, the Mississippi, it's an Algonquin word that means great water. And they also have some of the names of towns like Seattle and Spokane and Chicago. And so that's some of the things that really are still prevalent today in time. Another topic that I was asked to address briefly would be about the importance of uplifting voices and experience of Native people. And I think one of the main reasons that's really important because, again, their ways of life are tied to their local surroundings and environment. And even though a lot of them have been moved and live in other territories than they originally lived in, I think that still stands true today. And their cultural stories, they embraced sustainability long before that really came into the public domain because they were often the first ones to witness any disruption of effects of climate and environmental change. For instance, their waterways would become more polluted. They would notice that they weren't catching as many fish or that they were unable to drink that water. And also the landscape that just because of farming, especially the big farming methods, that's really changed their food gathering way of life too. So in a way, man who has been very impactful in environmental and climate change issues, that's one thing that really is noticeable, and they're probably some of the first to notice it. And so one of the things that I guess too is that there's a preconceived notions around what Native means. And I think that we're to the point, especially with a lot of the social justice movements going on now, where it's really timely that we need to really start looking at changing that narrative of what preconceived notions we have about what Native means. Because I think a lot of what has impacted the thoughts that people have formed about that come from, like, the 1900s and earlier. And so we need to kind of like rewrite those textbooks, and I think really bringing things into the curriculum of schools so that children really learn what some of that true history was. And I'm really happy to hear the programs around diversity and equity and inclusion that are coming up, because those are going to be so important. And I think that we need to look at addressing then what some of those cultural values are, the cultural history, the cultural visibility, and really the call to action. And we saw that so clearly with Standing Rock in 2016 and 2017, where they did put their values out there, and they were able to get very visible. They had so many, not just Native communities, but people all over the world supporting that action. And so I think one of the big things too is about their resilience and ability to carry on, because as they say, we are still here and we live on. So I'll just briefly sum this up on how to support and appreciate Native American culture, because I think that's really the big point here is how do people become an ally of this? And so I think a big thing is learning the present truth about the culture and history. Being Native means different things to different people, and it was already expressed how many tribes there are in this country and how many people that means, and depending again where they live, whether they're from rural area or whether they're from a city or even isolated areas, it makes a big difference. Another good thing would be to learn out whose land you are on and how you can, research that and honor that, because every land has its own story. Visit Native cultural centers and sites, invite local elders and tribal leaders to do opening programs or invocations and prayers at your events, and do your own work to educate yourself, because there's lots of information out there now. So I'll just end by saying, remember that we're connected to all living things, and everything has a spirit, and we are just one race, the human race. And so I hope we can learn to really share it with each other and have our responsibility to respect and protect each other and the earth. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcia, for that good, amazing message. We really appreciate it. I know we won't be able to hear it, but please join me in thanking Marcia for such an amazing message with us today. Thank you. Next up, I actually have the pleasure of introducing two of SIUE's faculty members who will be offering some additional remarks about the importance of Native American heritage, as well as how we can get connected and continue to uplift and support the contributions made by Indigenous folks within our community, similar to Marcia's message. The first faculty member that I would like to invite to join us is Dr. Gregory Fields. Dr. Fields is a faculty member in the Department of Philosophy as well as Native American Studies at SIUE. He conducts research in comparative philosophy, ethnohistory, and prevention of Pacific Northwest preservation, not prevention, preservation of Pacific Northwest culture and languages. Sorry. His current projects include the audio collection, Medicine Songs of the Four Seasons from the Straits and Coast Salish, forthcoming from Smithsonian Folkways, Sacred Breath, Pacific Northwest Culture and Medicine Teachings, and more. Please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Dr. Gregory Fields.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Hello. And thank you very much for the introduction. And it's an honor to be here with each and every one. And I want to really give thanks for the Thanksgiving address. That was just so peaceful and uplifting, and such good words and illuminating words from our keynote speaker. I'd like to see if I can open my screen share right now, because I have a visual I want to show, and I'm not really sure where to find that. So if you'll give me a minute, I'm going to look for it, and I will take suggestions. Here's share screen.
Carol, can you make sure that Dr. Fields has sharing possibility? It should be at the bottom of your screen, Dr. Fields. Oh, there we go.
Okay. So, yikes. That's not good. I've got lots of repeating dialog boxes, so I need some help.
Carol, maybe you can help troubleshoot.
Can you hit an Alt Tab to switch to the right application that you want to show? Just hit the Alt key and Tab, and that will switch to the ones you want to see, I think.
I've got a MacBook, so I don't really have an Alt key. What else do I?
Okay. Can you stop share for me? I think you've shared maybe the wrong. Okay, now I'm starting. Now you can open up whatever. So yeah, go ahead and stop screen share. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll stop the share for you.
Okay, would you?
Okay. Now, if you hit start screen share, if you just pick the application you want to show, that will work for you.
Should I hit share screen first?
Yeah, hit share screen and then select. If it's like PowerPoint, just select PowerPoint, and that would let us just see that.
It's actually a document I have right here.
Oh, okay.
There it is. Thank you for your help, and thank you for everyone for your patience. So I'm a philosopher, and I think you can hear me, right? Can I get a confirmation? And are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't
Yes,
see your
Carol.
document.
I can't see the document either.
Oh dear.
If you
That's
want,
not-
Dr. Fields, if you
Yeah.
want to put the file into the chat, and I can open it for you, so that way it's visible while you're doing it, while you're speaking.
Okay. How would I put the file into the chat?
So if you go to the bottom and see where there was share screen, there's also a chat bubble.
Okay.
Click on the chat bubble, and then you go to the bottom right of the chat screen. There should be a file button.
Mm-hmm.
Click the file button, and then add the document that you want shared in there, and then send it to the chat.
Great. Amazing.
And then hopefully it will send, and then I can also open it for you.
I hope it'll be worth it, and so you can see what I'm talking about.
I think it will absolutely be worth it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Give me
All
one
right.
second.
So, shall I open it?
I can open it for you. Just give me one
Yeah.
second.
Please do. All right.
Can you see the PDF?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, I got it for you.
Okay, very good. So my topic's Indigenous knowledge and sustainability. And I wanted to start with some characteristics of Native philosophy from Brian Yazi Burkhart, who's a Cherokee philosopher. And he has these 8 points. And I think I can scroll this. Of course, Native philosophy works with stories. It's original, innovative, creative, and active. And a good source here is Gregory Cajete at University of New Mexico on native science. And important for my field, see, I'm not getting this to scroll down, but maybe somebody could help me do that. Native philosophy doesn't really give arguments, but rather opens up a space for a person listening to stories or teachings or even reading philosophy or stories to find meaning in her own way. And as regards language, whether in native language or if English or another language is used, language is very dynamic. I think about attending epic storytellings in the Northwest where people dance the stories and they sing the songs of events of their ancestors and important things that happened, and through that the sound and the dance that those important events are really felt and experienced.
It's thinking practice.
Point 5 is about the holism of Native philosophy and considering our different disciplines to be integrated with one another and not separable from our cultural practice. And Dr. Burkhardt talks about a thinking practice hybrid. And I would mention also just the philosophical tradition of pragmatism, of problem-solving philosophy, which I think it's such a key part of American philosophy, both Native and the American philosophy that grew on this land, when Europeans arrived here, practical philosophy for the good of the people. And point 6, rather than truth or proof, the concern is meaning and understanding. Point 7, the idea of 4 directions and the idea of the circle, of the cycle of knowledge and experience understood as part of functions and cycles and processes. And lastly, the adaptation of teachings and stories for the people who hear them. This is just a very brief overview of some important features of Native philosophy, and I want to go next to mention 2 important principles of Native philosophy, and that's sovereignty and non-binary thinking. And then I'd like to connect those with sustainability. So just a little, hang on, if we could go up a little bit higher to sovereignty and non-binary thinking here. Sovereignty is, of course, a very deep and extensive issue, and I just took this one quotation from Burkhardt to express some of its essence. Intellectual sovereignty in practice includes capacity to speak one's voice without the forced assimilation of that voice to some dominant paradigm or dominant voice. And we'll come back to that idea. I want to say something about non-binary thinking. And here, if we could just scroll down a little bit, I mentioned in Chinese philosophy, there's of course the yin-yang philosophy, non-mutually exclusive poles of a process or an entity. We think about day and night. And if you think about a yin-yang symbol, there's a drop of white in the black and a drop of black in the white. And of course, we can recognize day and recognize white, but our Western logic wants to bifurcate things in order to establish, P or not P, true and false. And in fact, there are times of day that are not day or night. They're dawn or dusk. There are the teachings of the grandmother and the grandfather teachings. And I know in the Northwest, men learn the grandfather teachings, but they're also to learn the grandmother teachings, not to carry them in the same way, but to be able to get along with their female relatives and the women in their community. And the women are to learn about the grandfather teachings, also to have some of those strengths for themselves and get along with the males and all the people in the community. And so it's not so strictly bifurcated. So the idea here is now applied to the individual and the collective, that I look at my own society right now, and if people don't want to wear a face covering in a time of a public health crisis because it might, in their view, interfere with their personal liberty, that, in my view, lacks a respect for the welfare of the other persons. And there's such a crucial reciprocal relationship between the good of the individual and the good of the community that's so deeply understood and expressed in native thought and life, that I think really reflects how nature works and is essential to our humanity. They're not opposed to one another. So to say a little more about sovereignty, I wanted to mention Jack Forbes, who was a founder of DQ University, a native university in California, decades ago. And he spoke about the attitude of respect for self-determination of all living creatures as an implication of sovereignty, an attitude of profound respect for individuality and right to self-realization for all living creatures. Not just human persons, but the standing people, the trees, the winged people, all the animal people and the living people, the winds and the waters. And so I mentioned these, we could scroll down to the next page, please. I don't think I can. Kind of a call to caution from one of our greatest intellectual forces in native thought in the modern era, Dr. Vine Deloria of Standing Rock, who passed away in 2005. And he spoke of sovereignty as existing primarily within the community, as applicable to group action. And he spoke about the responsibility that sovereignty creates toward the existence and the continuance of the group. And the caution that he gave, as I understand it, was that this idea of intellectual sovereignty has a risk to it. It needs to be understood in a broader way. In this respect, he says tying sovereignty to individuals through intellectual sovereignty can run the risk of isolation as a native person, because next screen, please. What's so powerful about native thought and life and culture and civilization and socio-political systems is tribal societies, Deloria says, were great because of the kinship responsibilities, because people took care of their relatives, because they were committed to helping the weak and the helpless. And he goes on to say these virtues have to be at the center of our lives as actions, not somewhere in our minds as things we believe but do not practice. He says this in a 1998 article, Intellectual Self-Determination and Sovereignty. So I come now to the subject of sustainability, and my concern at this point in my career, not as an environmental philosopher, but someone who sees the immediate risks to our planet and to living things and to humans and to all peoples. Sustainability, I think, is such an urgent matter, no matter what discipline or profession we may follow. And so I connect these ideas in this way, that the principles and values of native thought that are crucial, such as respect and reciprocity and responsibility, grow from these commitments to sovereignty and to non-binary thinking as they manifest in people's relationships in the domains of nature and human culture and with the spirit. And so, as our keynote speaker said so beautifully, native philosophical systems, because they're grounded in these principles and methods, they're intrinsically oriented to sustainability, both environmental and social. And by that, I mean supporting healthy, well-functioning natural environments and also socio-political environments, environments where there is justice, where people have access to education and healthcare and food. And I would mention here food security because we know that Native people are disproportionately affected by environmental problems, by climate change. Food insecurity is a major problem. And in Native philosophy, we also find solutions to problems of food security for Native people and actually for humanity. So I want to close with some potential solutions, talking about sustainability and Native sovereignty. The problem here that I'm addressing from the standpoint of a teacher and a researcher in Native studies and as a non-Native is that activities associated with our human population growth, like pollution, deforestation, climate change, are threatening life on Earth in the immediate term, not down the road in decades, but in the immediate term. So this is kind of a little humorous quiz. What options would be most helpful for our intercultural relations to address these problems in the world? Obviously not misappropriating other people's cultural knowledge. I think B and C both. I think cooperation, but I also think coexistence. And I say this in part talking about Native and non-Native scholars and practitioners in my country, in the United States. Having worked with Lummi elder Pauline Hilaire on her book Rights Remembered, she's very much in favor of cooperation of scholars and scientists. She also defends the right of Native people to just coexist and to have their songs, their ceremonies, their knowledge, their land, and their lives just undisturbed, as they have had the right to have on this continent from time immemorial, and they should continue to have as citizens of their American nations, the US or Canada or any other. So I come now to the connection between collaboration and self-determination. And I'm very interested in the work of a young Native philosopher, Kyle White. He's at Michigan State University. He's Citizen Potawatomi, and he makes the observation that sometimes non-Native researchers think about Indigenous knowledge as just supplemental, filling their knowledge gaps, as if we have this structure of knowledge. And well, if I can learn more about how you work with, for example, bees and pollinators in your Native tradition, then I'll know more about how to work with that in my scientific agriculture. And Kyle White is really wanting us to recognize that Native knowledges can drive in productive ways how we seek knowledge, how we constitute knowledge, how we apply knowledge. So from the Native standpoint, he says, even though Native communities can benefit and do benefit from resources and information that they get by collaborating with academic projects, with government projects, they're fundamentally concerned with knowledge, whether in science or other fields, that will be helpful for their self-determination. That is in service of cultural resurgence and collective continuance. To put a finer point on it, you have to be able to survive to make use of extra special things. Survival is crucial. And his article, What Do Indigenous Knowledges Do for Indigenous People, appeared recently in the Cambridge Environmental Sustainability Anthology. So this isn't just from the Native standpoint, but now we see the United Nations International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land last year, come out more than we've seen ever before in identifying Indigenous knowledge as a resource for, quote, overcoming the combined challenges of climate change, food security, and biodiversity conservation. And there's a link to that. So Indigenous knowledges both ancestral and contemporary. And Kyle White talks about how it's not just the old knowledge systems, but those along with the new science and humanities and social science and practices that Native communities and people are conducting now offer many ways to understand ecology and human life in more functional ways. And I have a couple of references for that from Kahete and from Philip Deloria. But beyond that, indigenous approaches to sustainability can really make a difference protecting life on Earth. And I gave the example of Amazonian tribes who reduce their carbon emissions 2 to 3 times when they have control over their own forests. So I'm going to tell what we can do in our region to support education on Native knowledge and sustainability as just one possible idea. Before I do that, I want to pause because I've covered a lot of stuff and maybe somebody would like to jump in on an earlier point, and then I'll close with what our project is to try to help out advance some of these ideas here in St. Louis, Southern Illinois. Anyone have a comment about anything? Okay, well, thank you. So here's one idea. Last year, I convened a group of leaders of programs at 7 St. Louis, Southern Illinois institutions, scientists, social scientists, and humanists to coordinate efforts to host a collaborative conference on the topic Indigenous knowledge and sustainability. And our focus in 2021 is botany and food systems. So this covers everything from medicine plants to agriculture to food sovereignty. And if we can scroll down a little bit, I'll show you the program. This is October 6th through 13 next year. Everybody's welcome to attend by registration free of charge. You can attend one or all events. They last about an hour and a half each. There is a scientific meeting at Missouri Botanical Garden. It's all day Saturday, botanists, native and non-native, speaking on a variety of botanical topics. That does have a fee, but the rest of them are free. And there's a website at University of Missouri St. Louis, umsl.edu, and that's HWEC for Harris World Ecology Center. And you click on Events and Conservation Forum. And next page, I'll just show you the program. This is our logo. It looks like a sunflower or even like the sun, which is really the power behind all the plants and the animals through photosynthesis and nutrition. And we're sponsored by Missouri Botanical Garden, where we'll start out on cultural food initiatives here in St. Louis. And that's not only native, but everybody eats, and we have to honor the place where we are and the spirits of this land and the people of this place. And so we'll hear from people about foodways initiatives here in our region. Then the Buder Center for American Indian Studies at Washington University will host an event on food sovereignty, sustainability, and health. That'll be Thursday at noon. These are all on Zoom, and we'll have information available about how to register. The Harris World Ecology Center at UMSL will sponsor the Conservation Forum. And this is a little small to see, but we've got Kyle White will be a speaker. You may know of Dr. Robin Wall-Kimmerer at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse. She's also Citizen Potawatomi. And Dr. Tiffany Harbarger of the Cherokee Nation from Northeastern State. So Kyle's a philosopher, Robin is a biologist, botanist, and Tiffany Harbarger is a social scientist working in community development and sustainability. So we're really going interdisciplinary and wanting to invite the public as well as scholars and high school and college students. we'd like to invite college students to register for credit in independent studies in anthro or philosophy, and they can learn about that through our anthro sponsored minor in Native Studies that Dr. Zimmerman will talk about. Up at SIU, we're going to have a fascinating session on bringing back the pollinator plants and the bees and pollinators to some of our Midwestern reservations, sponsored by the St. Louis Zoo's Wild Care Institute, and that'll be at our geodesic dome. And then you have the Missouri Botanical Gardens scientific meeting. And this is the first time they've dedicated a whole meeting out of 67 years to entirely to indigenous botany and agriculture. So it's really wonderful, and we hope to see in future that this will infuse more Native thought and practice into our intellectual work and our teaching. And then at Coquille Mountain State Park, we'll have a session on Sunday to close out the conference, and a vigil for Indigenous Peoples Day sponsored by Washington University Buder Center, honoring Native people of our region, our nation, and our world. And last page is just the logo, and I say thank you for listening. And thank you for listening.
Should I go? Should I go?
Yeah, 1 second, Dr. Zimmerman. Yes, I got some good words to say about you
I'm
first.
in. Oh,
So thank you, Dr. Fields, for all that information. It's good additional information to what Marsha was saying. It's really helpful. And real quick, a word about Dr. Zimmerman before she jumps in, because I know she's ready. Our final speaker is Dr. Julie Zimmerman, a faculty member of the Department of Anthropology, as well as Native American Studies. She conducts archaeological research in the American Bottom and Illinois River Valley, investigating past Native American lifeways in this area. Dr. Zimmerman's work includes ritual objects in the Red Horn State, decoding the Theodore State Ekahokia, which was published in Illinois Antiquity in 2013. So with that, let's give a round for Dr. Zimmerman. Please, floor is yours.
thank you. And can I share my screen? Can I do that? Because I actually, yeah, can I?
I think so. Yes. Yep.
Can you see it? So I actually wanted to start by, and I'll go real fast because I know Dr. Pembroke must be here anxious to jump in, and we're supposed to be done. So I'm gonna tell a real fast story about a storyteller. Dr. Fields mentioned Pauline Hilaire, and he mentioned his work with her. She was of the Lummi tribe, and he's published several books and CDs based upon his work with her. Fabulous work. So let me tell you, I think it was back in maybe 2008, Dr. Fields brought Ms. Hilaire to our campus, and she was telling stories and singing songs and drumming in our beautiful geodesic dome on campus. And I was there with my small unruly children. And I was just so captivated by her stories and her songs. She reminded me of my own grandmothers, who were both wonderful storytellers. And Pauline mentioned back at her home campus, I think in Washington or Oregon, I forget which, she mentioned their American Indian Center, their Native American Center, where they had their educational program there. And I thought, my gosh, why aren't we doing that? Because we have faculty in anthropology who study Native Americans. We have Dr. Fields in philosophy. We had faculty at that time in political science and history. And so I was inspired to start our Native American Studies program because of Pauline's stories. So I'm not going to go through, I'm going to say briefly about our program. It is, so it's been in existence for about 10 years. Takes a couple of years to get the paperwork through, if you know how the state works. So it's been in existence for about 10 years, and it is interdisciplinary. But there is a heavy emphasis on, unfortunately, Native Americans of the past. If you look at most people who study Native American cultures in the St. Louis area, like myself, a lot of archaeologists, because we are 20 minutes from the largest archaeological site north of Mexico. Within anthropology, Dr. Corey Wilmot works with living Native Americans on Anishinaabe, for example. And of course, Dr. Fields works with Coast Salish peoples. But it's unfortunate when you look at our program that all the faculty in it are white. And that is not something that you would see in a Black studies program or a women's studies program, that you don't actually have African-American faculty, that you don't actually have women faculty in those programs. Okay, but unfortunately, it's not unusual for Native American studies programs. If you look at the program down in Carbondale, you're going to see a very similar program, heavy emphasis on anthropology and history, and presumably white faculty. The big exception in this area would be the Buder Center, which Dr. Fields just mentioned, over at Washington University in St. Louis, where you have Native American faculty teaching Native American students, training them specifically, educating them to be social workers. So because of this shortcoming in our program, we worked really hard over the last decade to bring Native American colleagues to campus, such as Dr. Fields' colleagues from Coast Salish, or for example, Dr. Wilmot's colleagues among the Anishinaabe. So we've been really successful in bringing, and one of my favorites, again, because I loved my grandmothers and they were both such wonderful storytellers, Ardina Moore, who's 90 years old this year. And she came 5 years ago to talk to us about her language revitalization program among the Quapaw. So, so it's been a really wonderful opportunity for me to teach the introduction to Native American studies and think more about living Native Americans, and to work and have just short experiences with these Native Americans that we've brought to campus. And so let me end on a plea then. Dr. Mahoney mentioned the strategic plan for the SIU system, which is supposed to be really focusing on diversity initiatives. And we would welcome funding. Guess what? Our program doesn't actually have any funding. We have brought all these speakers to campus by begging, borrowing, and stealing money to bring them here. COVID shut down. Dr. Fields had all these people coming with no funding to live meetings this fall. And it was canceled because, or postponed because of COVID. And so next fall, these people are coming back remotely, virtually. So COVID at the same time has shut down our visits to campus. At the same time, it's opened the world to us through this virtual programming. So we're appreciative of that. And it's much cheaper than flying people from the other side of the country and staying in hotels. So I really hope everyone will take advantage of that, the fabulous conference that Dr. Fields has planned for next fall. But I'm going to put a pitch out there to Dr. Mahoney and to our Chancellor Pembroke that if you want to put your money where your mouth is, we have no funding for Native American studies here at SIUE. And this is what's worse. We've been getting by without the funding because we're creative and we apply for money. But what's worse, okay, is that our faculty have retired and left, and we are down to a core classes. We're barely able to keep our program, our minor here in Native American Studies going at SIUE. And if you want to see that going, please hire Native American faculty. Please provide the funding to bring Native American faculty here to the Edwardsville campus in Carbondale while you're at it. We would love to bring in Native American experts in literature or Native American art, or we're right next to the Buder Center in St. Louis. If you, it'd be very realistic, I think, and doable for our administration to hire somebody out of the Buder Center. They'd probably be happy to come across the river and teach social work here on our campus. So I put that challenge out there to you, administrative leaders of our campus. And with that, I will stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zimmerman. I appreciate it. And thank you for all of our speakers. At this time, I'm going to pass it to Maddie McKenzie to introduce our final and closing speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone, or evening, I guess. I'm Maddie McKenzie. I'm the diversity officer here at SIUE. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce our final speaker to bring us some closing remarks. The Chancellor of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, Dr. Randy Pembroke. Dr. Pembroke became the 9th Chancellor at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville on August 1st, 2016. He is a 3-time alum of the university and is a strong proponent of the mission of diversity, equity, and inclusion at SIUE. Please join me in inviting Chancellor Pembroke to offer remarks.
Well, thank you, Maddie. That was a very nice introduction. I appreciate that. So as I understand it, I'm the closer. So I'm going to try to close at this point. And let me close by doing what I really enjoy doing, which is to say thank you. So I want to say thanks to our speakers. Marcia, thank you for reminding us of the importance of Thanksgiving, and particularly how Native Americans express Thanksgiving. Gregory, I was taken by your comments about Native American philosophy, particularly understanding versus proving. I love that. Constructive group action. I think that is so important. And we wish you well about your conference next October. Julie, thank you for reminding us of the power of stories and songs. And as a musician, as a music major, that obviously rings true to me, and how those things change lives. I also want to thank President Mahoney and Chancellor Lane for speaking today. And I'll thank a few other people here in just a moment. I don't know if everyone knows it or not, but Native American celebration and the recognition of that celebration actually started out as a week celebration in 1986. And obviously now it has expanded in very, very exciting ways. So I just want to call attention as we close to some other things, some other opportunities that you have, and I hope that you'll attend and be part of. November 12th, we have Native American Rock Art of Illinois, a presentation. On the 13th of November, inclusive conversations about missing Indigenous women. November 16th, Native American Student Town Hall meeting. November 18th, a panel discussion about cultural appreciation. And November 19th, something that sounds just incredibly fascinating, Native storytelling. So I hope you'll be a part of all of those events. They sound very, very exciting. I also want to close by thanking the people that made this session possible. So Lindy and your friend Tarsha Moore, thank you for creating this. They work at the SIUE Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion. And the month-long programming that I just mentioned, Lindy and Tarsha are involved with that, along with Krista English, Sarah Marbs, Maddie McKenzie, thank you, Maddie, and Erica Wise. So let me just close by saying that this month gives us a chance to reflect on so many things relating to Native Americans and Native American heritage. And there's a quote that I want to leave you with, and that is that we should rededicate ourselves as an institution to an appreciation of the strength to be found in acknowledging and celebrating our shared humanity. Julie, I think you'll be pleased to know that the Anti-Racism Task Force recommended a diversity speaker series, and that's something that I committed to and that we're going to be working on immediately. So I'll be getting a hold of you on that, okay? So thank you all for joining us this afternoon, this evening. We hope you enjoyed this program, and please, please, please take advantage of the upcoming events that I mentioned. With that, Lindy, I'll turn it back to you if you have anything to say.
Just want to say thank you so much, Chancellor Pembroke. And again, thank you everyone for being here. We've really enjoyed having time with all of you who are watching, and we hope to see you at our events. So thank you for coming, and have a good evening. Bye, everyone.
All right.